Hi and welcome to the second tutorial of my RPG tools. Today we will continue where we left yesterday. So I will introduce you to the tools needed to develop a full game. Yesterday we created our first character, and today I will show you the data editor which you need to develop a game. In the data editor you can define a lot of different kinds of data, and I will give you a quick introduction to every category here. So the first category is called settings. It contains global generic settings. You can define the start level, which we will create later on, and the starting area if you have a custom area where you want to spawn your hero. You can disable features. The list of features you can disable will be extended later on. You can also define physics categories and define some global values, which will also be extended later on. So currently we can just keep all these as they are. And in the second category, you can define stats. I already added some predefined stats because these stats are required for most of the games, especially RPGs. So hit points and maximum hit points, experience level and movement speed. But you can add any custom stat you want here. And for this tutorial, we will add mana and maximum mana. So you can just add them. So let's define the maximum stat first and the stat with the current mana here. And for this, it's important to pick the maximum value. Then the stat knows which stat defines the maximum value. And we also want to have stats which define how much damage you will deal. So I will add a stat called strength and defense. And for later on, we want to create spells. So I will also create a stat called magic, but you can add any custom stats you want here. And when you save in the data editor, it will save everything here. But I can quickly show you how it looks like. So by default, it saves everything in the default project folder, but you can save it in a different folder if you want to. And as you can see here, there are a lot of different JSON files which are human readable. And for example, we just changed the stats, so I can just quickly show you how it looks like. You can use any text editor you want, and you don't need to do it. I will just show you how it looks like. So you can see all the stats in a human readable format. And it's also source control friendly, so you can use Git or anything you want to manage that. But that was just a side note, so you never need to open that manually. The next category is called experience, and here you can define the experience curve. So here I can add some levels, and then I can define how much XP you need to reach this level. So let's say for level 2 I need 200 XP, for level 3 I need 500, and for level 4 I want 1000 XP, and then you can see the curve here and see the tooltips here. Let's keep it like that. And here you can define scripts, which are Lua scripts. So I use Lua for scripting, and you have access to a lot of stuff in the game. So with Lua, you can do very complex stuff, but it's also completely optional if you just develop a game the engine is made for. So if you develop a Diablo or Baldur's Gate style game, then Lua should be optional. So we will also skip that for now. I will later on do a tutorial about scripting in detail. Then we have damage types, and you can define how damage is calculated for the different damage types, for example, melee or ranged or fire damage, for example. And in this case, I developed a simple formula system where we can do things like using the attacker strength and then adding a new element where I want to divide it by the defender's defense. And here you can see a preview. Or let's make it a bit more complex and useful. So let's say attacker strength multiplied by 2 divided by defender's defense. So that should be enough for one damage type. Later on we will also create a fireball, so I will create the second one here. And for this one we will use the magic stat and multiply it by a constant value. So let's multiply by 3. Of course, these are just simple formulas and you should take more time to do these. Then we have attack types. For example, you can have a sword attack. And here you can define the animations which this kind of attack uses. For that you need to use the animation names which fit. So we switch back to the character editor and then we will check which animation would be a good fit for attacks, for sword attacks. So you can use the filter to easily find it. And then let's increase the scale. And I will check if it looks good with a sword. So I will just give her a sword. Yes, that looks good. But we will remove the sword again because the character shouldn't have the sword by default. But now I know the animation name, and you can add multiple ones, but for this tutorial I will just add one. In this case you need to type the whole name. I will later on add a picker for that to make it easier. So the name attack one-handed overhead. So you need to remember that, attack one-handed overhead, and then type it here. So that should be it. You can add attack sounds, which should be sword attack sounds in this case, and hit effects. Hit effects are particle effects, which I will show you in a later tutorial. Then we have meshes, which are 3D models, but these are also completely optional, and I have a few videos about them. So you can add them here, and you can use a lot of different file types for that. But for this tutorial, we will skip it. And next we have character classes. So here you can define your character class the player can choose from, and you need at least one, even if you don't have a character selection, because the hero will need to use one class which defines a lot of things, as you can see here. So you can give it a name and a description. And important, you need to pick a character. That's a bug that it's displayed multiple times, but you can choose one of these. And now we need to define the stats, the initial stats. So let's give her some hit points, some movement speed, which is pixels per second. So let's use 140, some mana, some strength, some defense, and some magic. And here you can define what happens when there is a level up. So in this case, you can have entries for every level, and then for every level you can have things that are added, which are currently stats or abilities. So in this case, we can, for example, just increase the hit points by 10. We can also give our hero a new ability for a specific level. And here we can add abilities the hero has initially, and the same for items and resources. But these need to be defined in the next tabs. So we have a simple character class. Now we can create an ability. For abilities, we should have an effect, because otherwise we can't display it properly in the game. For that, we can quickly jump to the particle editor. The default particle should be good enough for now. You can play around with all the settings, and you see the runtime preview here, the live preview here. But for this tutorial, you can just use the default values and save it as fireball.json. And then we can add our ability here. Let's call it fireball. And here you can choose your effect. I support different types of effects. So one is particle, which is the built-in particle editor you just saw, or effects here, or Dragon Bones. So these two are quite powerful. So you can just use these. The particle editor will be extended in the future, but I think it will never be as powerful as effects here, for example. But for now, just use the simple particle effect we just created and pick a damage type, in this type fireball. The spawn distance, yes, the distance in pixels, the projectile will be spawned away from the character. And here you can define the stat cost. So in this case, you should, no, not magic, I meant mana. So let's say 5 mana for one fireball. And here you can define the image, which is displayed in the UI, and also a sound, which is played when you cast a fireball. But for now, we will not set that. But you can just use any WAV file you want, and for images, any PNG file. And when you go to browse, it will directly point you to the correct directory, so you can just paste PNG files here. Then we have resources. These are, in most simple games, you just have one resource like gold. You can define an icon for it, and then you can use it for trading and things like that. So next we have items. For items, at first you need to define the slots you have, the item slots and the equipment slots. So for item slots. Let's add main hand and ring. And for equipment slots, also main hand, which needs a reference to the item slot, which is also called main hand. But now we will have multiple rings. So let's say one ring per hand. Then we have a left ring, which uses the ring item slot, and we have a right ring or right hand ring, which also uses the item slot, the ring slot. Sorry. So and now we can create items. So let's create an item, call it simple sort. You can choose an image or a mesh. So if you want to have a 3D display instead, you can use a mesh here. You can define the default price for a trader. So let's say 10 gold, for example. And here you can choose the type. In this case, it's a weapon. It's in the main hand slot. And here you can define the animation used from all the PV Games assets, and you can use the filter to find a sword. So I will just use a sword from the female orc, for example. I choose the damage type melee and the attack type sword attack. And I could also add upgrades, which are stat upgrades or ability upgrades, which are applied when you equip the weapon. But for our sword, I won't do that, but it makes sense for more complex weapons. We will skip loot for now. There are loot tables. They are quite easy to use. You can configure them in every unit, and then you can configure the drop chance for every item. But we will skip it for this tutorial. And the same for quests. I will introduce you to that in a future tutorial. And the other categories are also not important right now, so we will save everything. And now, just to make sure that everything works, we will switch to the level editor. By default, it creates a simple level. You can also resize it if you want. It's 64 by 64 tiles. Or you can create a new level with a bit more parameters. But for our test, we just use it as it is. As you can see here, it uses smooth transitions, which can be turned off here. So by default, it would look like that, but with smooth transitions, it looks much nicer. And I will create a separate tutorial for the level editors. So for now, we will just switch to the object layer and place a unit. So let's use a cat and go to game logic and use the wander behavior, then it should move around. And we save it as the start level. So and now if everything went right, we should be able to play it, or at least to start it and move around. Yes, that works. And the cat is also moving around. So of course there's not too much to see yet because we don't have UI defined yet and things like that, but this initial setup will allow us to create everything later on. So thanks for watching. I will show you more stuff in the near future.